think our only real difference of opinion is whether the incoming Labour government will pave the way for us to rejoin the EU.
Yeah.
I think not. I think you think yes. And that's our main area of disagreement, which I hope over the next hour.
I hope we can pad that out to an hour, Richard.
Well...
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Sunday Roast, and we have a very special edition today. We have two opposites, maybe. We'll have to wait and see. Let's start off with Graham. Graham, can you tell us a bit for anyone who's new to the show?
Hello, I'm Graham Hughes. I'm the world's most travelled Scouser. I'm the first person to visit every country in the world without flying, and then I won a private island on a game show. But then I came back to the UK in 2016 to fight against Brexit. It was the biggest failure of my life, as Brexit did actually happen. And then during COVID, I started streaming. I made my YouTube platform bigger and bigger. And then last year, I launched Labour Social as a politics channel, which last week I decided to change the name to Politics Social, because when Labour get into power in a few weeks' time, I don't want our channel to be like a mouthpiece of the government. That goes against all of my rebellious nature. So yeah, we're Politics Social now, and that's the way it's going to stay.
Fantastic. Richard.
Well, thank you, Max. Unlike Graham, I spent most of my life with my feet up on the sofa looking at the TV thinking society is generally going roughly in the right way, I think, until once again the 2016 disaster of Brexit, when I suddenly realised that I had to do something to try and at least oppose this ridiculous policy that so far destroyed our country as a result. And obviously in the 2016 to 2020 period, I tagged along with some of the other rational, sensible approaches that seemed to be likely to work at the time. And when we saw our politics totally fail us in the 2019 election, I, together with others, set up a political party called the Rejoin EU Party to pretty much try to rejoin the EU. Now, I have to say, in that time, I kind of hoped that other parties would steal our thunder and start talking about the disaster that is Brexit, that is affecting our country. But I've been horrified by the conspiracy of silence that we've seen. I recognise actually that since the election's been called, a few noises have been made by some of the larger but not largest parties. I'm sure we'll come on to discuss that in due course. But still, nobody really wants to address the elephant in the room. So, like Graham, I am greatly looking forward to seeing a new government come into power in the next few days. And I will be looking forward to see how we can best affect the evolution of that government over the next 5 years.
Fantastic. My wonderful co-host, Alex, can you tell us a bit about yourself for anyone who's new to the show?
Hi, my name is Alex, also known as Political X. I am a journalist, historian, and teacher. And my wonderful co-host, Max.
My name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel, where I talk about British politics and Brexit in particular. So this is this should be a very interesting discussion for me as well. Alex, we're going to talk about Brexit in general and the idea of rejoining the European Union. What's our first question?
So we've got our first question. I'm also going to just say to the audience listening in, we will be having a vote on this on the live chat when it goes and premieres on Sunday at 10 a.m. And that'll be in the last 20 minutes of the video. And we'll also offer it up onto our comments sections. There are 7 questions in total. So first question, and we'll put this over to Richard, and then we'll go over to Graham, and then vice versa. Richard, how does your party plan to address the current economic challenges faced in the UK? And which approach do you believe is most effective?
To my mind, the single biggest economic problem we face at the moment is the consequences of Brexit, the disrupted trade links that we have with our nearest trading partners in the EU. We can't ignore the fact that since Brexit, the pound lost roughly 20% in its value, almost, not overnight, over the 2 or 3 months after Brexit. And with the soaring inflation that we've seen since, partially as a result of COVID, I'll grant you that, but also as a result of hitting our supply chains, a pound in 2016 is now worth about 61p in 2024. And that is something that I think can at least be partially addressed by simply indicating what the way forward is. We don't have to rejoin the European Union on July the 5th, but a government coming in that would signal that direction of travel would immediately start our currency recovering on the international exchanges, would immediately start business confidence that we've got a sensible way forward. And quite frankly, the longer we delay, the longer we wallow in the cost of living crisis. So my somewhat simplistic solution is elect a government that is proactively directed towards rejoining the EU, and we will start the economic recovery from that point.
Graham, would you like me to repeat the question to you?
No, it's fine. With Labour, I mean, we don't actually know because the manifesto, as at the time of recording, hasn't been released. But there is a lot of evidence that they're going to go for a renegotiation of the Brexit deal once they're in power, which has to happen in 2026, I think, anyway. But also moving towards more regulatory alignment, which is the first and foremost thing that we need to do. I had Liz Webster from Save British Farming on my show a few days ago, and she was saying, yeah, regulatory alignment, we need that like as soon as possible. And it's something that the Brexiteers probably won't even notice. But when it comes to what Richard was talking about, the conspiracy of silence. So I want to address this. This is because the power that three individuals, the Berkeley brother, there's only one left now, Lord Rothermere, who lives in France, I think, Nondom, and Rupert Murdoch, a man born 100 years ago, 12,000 miles away, who's never paid tax in this country. The power that they have is just insane. And Keir Starmer right now has one job, and that is to win this election. And if they come in all guns blazing saying, we're going to rejoin the EU as soon as possible, unfortunately, the tabloids are going to just absolutely crucify them. So we need press reform so that then we can move towards these economic reforms that we need. First of all, regulatory alignment, like I just said, but then moving towards single market, customs union. Macron has talked about an outer orbit of the EU, that Moldova and Ukraine might be able to join. We might be able to join that, where we don't send MEPs along, but we align on most things. Because at the moment, Richard's absolutely right. Our economy hasn't grown since 2007. 17 years. You look it up right now. Google it. UK GDP 2007. You will see a graph. It'll come up on Google and have a look how much it was. It was $3 trillion. And have a look at what it was in 2022, the last date that you can get on Google.
Can I just come back on a couple of things Graham said there? Because I would say from what you've just said there, our agreement is probably about 80%. But there's two particular things I want to talk about. First of all, if this was the 2017 election that you were putting in context, I would absolutely agree with you with the absolute need to get out the government of the day in order to have a better future. We didn't succeed in 2017, and that's a shame, but these are different circumstances. Keir Starmer is so far ahead in the polls. The talk about him having to focus on winning the election, that's moot. He's won the election. Quite frankly, he could now come out with abolishing the monarchy and then moon Beth Rigby on live TV. He would still win this particular election from this stage. And secondly, just one thing I want to ask you to clarify there, Graham. What you said to me sounded like you wanted, and I don't want to put words in your mouth here, you wanted a better Brexit rather than rejoining the EU. Is that your priority, a better Brexit, or do you still say we would be better off with full EU membership in the long run?
We would absolutely be better off with full EU membership, seat at the top table like we used to have, I mean, I've traveled a lot, and one of the points I make continuously, especially to Brexiteers, when they do this thing because they don't know about the world, they've never traveled, they've never gone anywhere, except maybe to Marbella on holiday. And they go, we'll trade with the rest of the world. And I'm like, how many countries are there in the world? Most people don't know. There's 193 members of the United Nations. 150 of them are developing nations. 150 don't have the kind of consumers living in those countries that can buy our product at the scale that we need to sell it to them in order for us to make any money out of those countries. It's just not worth it. And the idea that we go, I always think this analogy of going into the bank for a bank loan and going, I'm going to start a business. It's called the Brexit UK. Okay, what's the business? We're going to buy cheap stuff from Ghana. Okay, what are you going to sell? Nothing. We're not going to sell anything. We're just going to buy cheap stuff from Ghana because we can do that now. Yay, chocolates. Can I
just point out that it looks like you're in Dragon's Den in the background?
It does, yeah. I lost my pen. But yeah, I see a roadmap to rejoining the EU, and there's certain things that need to be ticked off along the way. First of all, is press reform. I don't think we can even. I think one of the reasons why we're not seeing politicians, progressive politicians, even in the Lib Dems, really talking about stopping Brexit or rejoining the EU at the moment is because they know they're going to get hammered by the tabloids, and they still have that much power. And don't forget, you know, the Tories have put their own people in the BBC. They've got their own people running Ofcom. GB News gets away with murder 13 times in a row. And it's like, oh, don't do it a 14th time. And they're like, okay, we'll be good. Yeah, wink, wink. So that's got to be done. But then, you know, you've got the other things that I talked about the regulatory realignment, single market, customs union. And going into the 2029 election, there's something else that I think is absolutely critical before we rejoin the EU, which I'm hoping is going to be a part of the 2029 election is going to be fought on, which is proportional representation. We need a better voting system in this country so that smaller parties like Rejoin EU stand a chance. Because at the moment, you're not going to win a seat. You can stand, but first past the post.
You mean I'm not going to be Prime Minister after the election? No.
Well, Liz Truss was Prime Minister, so I guess anything's possible.
Well, Graham, I thought we were going to have a nice debate here. The fact you compare me to Liz Truss earlier on, I think ups the adrenaline level.
Gloves are off. But yeah, just to go back to the point of like the roadmap. So then you've also got the EU, because the EU is not going to want us back at the moment. Because if Labour said we are going to take us back, no, hang on. If they said, yeah, we're going to take them back, take us back into the EU in the next Parliament before 2029, if the Tories get in 2029, they'll take us back out again. And the EU don't want that. The EU don't want this hokey-cokey, oh, it needs to be a settled issue. And the way that we settle that is by convincing conservative voters, because we're all convinced. Like every progressive voter in the country is like, we told you it would be a disaster, and it is. But then you've got to get the Tories on side to go, yeah, okay. Fair enough. It's a disaster, but hey, no one likes to admit they were wrong. So there's a battle there.
I'd like to come back on a few of those points. The interesting thing I think we've established there is we both want to rejoin the EU. We both think it's going to happen in due course. Perhaps where we disagree is whether or not an incoming Labour government in 2024 will enhance that or hold it back. I say this with respect to the people I speak to standing as Labour candidates, and I know there's some great people standing as Labour candidates. My worry is this is not 97, and it's not 97 for a number of reasons. First of all, we have the similar idea that people hate the Conservative government and want to get rid of it. But added to that, in 1997, there was a genuine enthusiasm amongst many quarters for Tony Blair and his programme, which I don't think there is for Keir Starmer. So my fear is that we are going to have 5 years of a Labour government that talks a good game but doesn't deliver. 5 years where the rhetoric becomes, oh, look how well we did under first past the post. We've got a majority of 150, 200. Why would we change the system? Which unfortunately is exactly the mentality that we had in 1997. And I don't think it's the Tories that are going to be walking through the door in 2029. I think it's going to be Nigel Farage. I think it's going to be the absolute fringe right wing, again, on a first past the post system, using that to get back in. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that when Labour are elected, they completely wow me. And Graham said we don't like to be proved wrong. I promise you, I would love to be proved wrong here. Graham, I would love to come on your show in 2027 and you say to me, what an idiot you are, Richard. You said none of this would happen back in 2024. And I will go, mea culpa, life is great now.
I would never call someone an idiot on my show. That's what Twitter's for.
Well, you already compared me to Liz Truss, so...
No, I did. I just said, well, Liz Truss could be Prime Minister, so anyone could. So I was comparing myself to Liz Truss. But yeah, to come back on those, what you just said, that the general enthusiasm thing, you can find articles from back in 1997 where there's people talking about there's no enthusiasm for Labour, no enthusiasm for Tony Blair.
That's wrong.
I know, but it's what people were saying at the time. Yeah, I was there as well. It was the first election that I voted in.
Yeah.
But then also, you know, we talk about Keir Starmer and the Labour Party sort of crossing the ice rink with the Ming vase and, you know, trying not to break it. And that's why when you saw the debate last week with Angela Rayner, she was very subdued. She wasn't a normal feisty self because they just can't afford to put a foot wrong. You know, things could still happen in the next 3 weeks that blow all the polls all over the place. But when if Labour come in and they promise to do a load of stuff that they then don't deliver, then you're absolutely right. Nigel Farage will come in with his cronies in 2029. And that's the danger. So I was rather that Keir Starmer said, right, what's sensible? What can we do? Don't forget, he ran for election before, as leader, before COVID, before Russia invaded Ukraine, before the kamikaze budget. I mean, like, so much since then. And the economy is a nightmare at the moment. Inflation's a nightmare. Interest rates are a nightmare because of Tory malfeasance. But he's going to have to spend the next 5 years fixing that and fixing that properly. And that's one of the reasons why I want Labour to have a strong majority so they can actually get this stuff done. People talk about, oh, it'd be great to go hung parliament. I'm like, no, they wouldn't get anything done. Look at America, where they're completely reliant on, like, Joe Manchin to try and get anything through the Senate. And he goes, no, I'm not doing that. And I'm like, one person shouldn't have that much power. And also, I want to see this election destroy the Tory party. I want them absolutely decimated. 1993, Canada style. In 1993, the Canadian Conservative Party were in power, and then they lost all their seats bar 2. And within a couple of years, they were defunct as a political party. In 1906, Arthur Balfour, the Tory Prime Minister, did so badly in that election that he lost his seat. Rishi Sunak looks like he could lose his seat in Richmond and Northallerton. Don't forget what's in Richmond and Northallerton, Catterick Barracks. There's a lot of military people there, and they are not impressed with him leaving D-Day early last week. So there's two things going on at once. I want to see that, because I want to see a Labour Party that is given everything it needs to try and change things for the better. And if it doesn't deliver that, as you said, Richard, then we'll, in the 2029 election, I think we can have words. But to go back to the point about PR, I think that, although I don't think Tony Blair ever wanted PR, but one of the problems in that administration was that the unions didn't want it. Now, 2 years ago in 2022, in the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, it wasn't just the delegates who voted for PR to take it on as part of the party strategy. It was also a majority of the unions. So with their backing, and I know that a lot of people in the shadow cabinet want PR as well. I mean, first past the post makes no sense for Labour. The Tories have been in power for 66 of the last 100 years. It's not good for Labour. It's not good for democracy. It's not good for anyone. So as long as we have a proportional representation system, and I did a video with Femi Olawale last week talking about this, as long as we keep the constituency link using using one of those systems, I think it's something that we could definitely bring in. I'm bringing reform of things like the House of Lords as well.
Well, I mean, I would be quite happy to go on for another hour about my views on how we could introduce a PR system like that. And I totally agree with you, Graham, that that's what we should have. But let's look at what is going to happen in this election and the psychological impact it's going to have on the people elected in Labour. Labour will get approximately 40% of the vote. It may be 40 something, it won't be 50. They will get 60 to 65% of the seats in Parliament. Now, that means that Starmer, who has already said, despite those votes, that it is not a priority, in inverted commas, Starmer will not be able to resist the thought, why am I going to allow other people into government when I'm so strong? And this is how the Blairites felt in 2001, even 2005, when, of course, Iraq was causing them problems. They still could rely on the first past the post system to keep them in a comfortable majority. Now, again, this is another area that I hope I'm wrong, Graham, and I hope, again, in 2029, I'm on your show as one of the parties in a PR-based election, and you're saying, how have you got the cheek to stand here, Richard? You told me this would never happen 5 years ago. But this is my deep worry. We never seem to learn from history. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of lessons we need to learn. So when it comes to Graham supporting a PR system introduced by the Labour Party, I will be the first person cheering when a reasonable PR system is introduced to the next general election. But I want to go back to the other point as well. And no disrespect to yourself, but I've heard a lot of people talking about the obliteration of the Tory party. And with the horrible things they've done over the 14 years, who wouldn't really want to see that happen? But the problem is, who fills the vacuum? Who becomes the opposition party? And I think we can look to nations like France to see examples of this, where traditional parties have let their society down so bad they've been replaced. We have the moderate Macronistas at the moment, but as we know, the vacuum is now being filled by the hard right. And I think if we did get the Tories down to 2 seats in the general election, then the important thing is who becomes the official opposition. Starmer's going to have a 3-figure majority, whatever happens. It's a case of, is it the Brexit party, led by Nigel Farage, who's the opposition, or is it the Liberal Democrats led by Ed Davey? And that, to me, is the ground where the election is if we have the apocalyptic scenario. To be frank with you, I think it's more likely to be a fight between the Tories and the Lib Dems for the leader of the opposition. But I really do say be careful what you wish for. A good democracy needs a strong opposition. This is why I voted for Sadiq Khan in the London election, because I think people like the Labour mayors are probably going to be the most effective progressive source of opposition that we see after this election. And that, again, is a concern that I have.
I want to see Lib Dems be the official opposition. I want them doing the opposition day motions. I want them on select committees. I want the Overton window dragged kicking and screaming back from the far right where it is now. I mean, the level of discourse in this country is disgusting. If you left in 1997 and came back in 2024, you would be amazed. You would be amazed at just how toxic the discussion has become. And I really liked what Stephen Flynn of the SNP said last week in that debate, where he stood up and said,
and what we need to do is end the demonisation of migration.
You're all standing there saying we're going to cut immigration, we've got to get rid of these immigrants and all this. And it's ridiculous. We need people from other countries to come here. And we do. Well, we've got a fertility rate of less than 1.6. It needs to be 2.1.
Yeah. 156. Do you know what the replacement rate is?
Thank you, Alex.
Sorry. We've been so quiet. Do you know what the replacement rate is needed to be at?
Yes.
Do you know how many thousands of people you need to replace that low birth rate?
Approximately the 600,000 we're getting in as immigrants, I believe.
It's between 400 and 600,000 a year.
Yeah.
Then you've got the size of Glasgow leaving the country every year.
Yeah.
For the last 2 years. So you're going, that's 1.2 million, which is why the Conservatives have probably been going, we need 1.2 million.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of, like, they're not daft.
In Ireland, I just want to say in Ireland in the 1980s and 1990s, we talked about migration. Emigration, people leaving the country. And of course, this is still this is also something happening in Britain because of we're hearing about doctors, nurses leaving because of the pay and the conditions in the NHS, which are the responsibility of the government. But they're going to Australia, they're going to Canada, where pay and conditions are much better. But there's no mention of that in the media, of course. It's all about immigration. It's all about these numbers coming in. But yeah, that needs to change as well.
No one's bringing that up. And the manifestos I've looked at so far, only the Tories have actually tried to address that. Like, I looked at the Lib Dem manifesto. There's nothing about addressing the population decrease. Nothing. Yeah. But weirdly, the Tories have actually put in some policies that I think will just... You need stitches, and they're putting a tiny little plaster on it to fix it. It doesn't actually solve the problems. So their policies aren't good enough. But it's interesting, and I'll bring up the birth rate, but I'll also bring up, no one's talked about Russia. Boris Johnson asked 3 times about Russian interference in the last election. The media completely and utterly failed on that. Now we come into the next election, and again, no one's talking about that. And we've just been attacked by Putin. That's why we got shut off air. And that happens all the time. And
I'll remain a bit skeptical on that point. But...
yeah, and Russian state agents came over to our country and murdered a British citizen, Dawn Sturgis. And what did Boris Johnson do in response? He went to a Russian orgy in Italy without a security profile, without vetting it with anyone before going. And apparently he took some documents because he went straight from a NATO meeting.
Yeah. And he was meant to have a chat with the foreign secretary from Russia. That was a rumor that came out. And the reason we know this is because the Italian secret services have leaked this and said that he's a major concern.
So just to address that, the Labour have already announced that they're going to have 2 major inquiries, one into PPE fraud and the other one into I think is it the care homes that they're doing an investigation into. They've already said they're going to do that. And don't forget, Keir Starmer used to be the director of public prosecutions. He's the guy who actually brought down, if you think about it, the News of the World, because they were done for phone hacking in 2011. I think they finally got closed down, but he was bringing those prosecutions against the Murdoch Corporation. And sorry, I just get really upset that man has so much power over the hearts and minds of 70 million of my fellow countrymen and women it just drives me up the wall that he
Doesn't
has
have to
that
be
much
that
power.
way.
Yeah, press
gonna-
regulation. You've got to live here.
Yeah.
You can't own more than like 4% of the press. Like, it's just, and if you lie, you have to put it on the front page every day for a week, saying we lied because we are.
According to the papers, Murdoch has now given it over to his son. I think it's the third born that he's given all the power over to.
But it's still a Murdoch.
It's still a Murdoch, but the rumor is the son is not interested in the UK. He's interested in Australia and America, and he's taken the foot off the gas with the son. And I'll have a question for you on that as well. But that is apparently what's coming out in the press. Murdoch's now retired at the age of what, 100 or something crazy?
93.
Richard.
Yeah, let's not glibly move on from immigration so quickly as that. It really is a big issue for many people. And I do think Graham is absolutely right that we really have to lay out the arguments very, very fully. It's not just that we have the low birth rate, and it has recovered a bit. I looked at the statistics this morning, actually, and I think we're at 1.75. It's bounced back a little bit before COVID. But as you say, 2.1 is the critical figure that we have to reach. The other thing we have to bear in mind, and this is very important for voters, we have a huge baby boom generation going into retirement now. Now, that baby boom generation are promised a triple lock pension, but it relies on a working population supporting it. Now, the only way we can have a working population supporting that demographic as it gets old is having lots of young, motivated people in our workforce. Now, obviously, hopefully most of us still open our hearts to the people fleeing terrible conditions across the world, most recently, of course, in Gaza and Ukraine, traditionally in Yemen, Sudan, coming to our country. These are exactly the people we want. They are young, motivated individuals looking for a society to which they can contribute to. And quite frankly, they are the only solution there is to the age bomb that we've got at the top of our demographic. And indeed, one of the fun questions I have had on the campaign trail really was someone who's very anti-immigration demanding to know what I do about the small boats. And when I told them I'd sold the small boats on day one, they dropped their jaw and said, how would you do that? And I told them by putting on larger boats, because this is what we need to do. We need to make sure that anyone with a legitimate asylum claim is given a legitimate path into the UK in order to present that claim. And for those people who complain about, oh, European bureaucracy, that sort of thing, one thing we used to have, of course, was the Dublin Accord, where with our neighbours, we could look at the people fleeing persecution across the world and come to an equitable arrangement whereby they could equitably be relocated across the European Union. We've lost that now, and that's something that I think we need to introduce there. So, as I say, Alex, sorry for that, but I really do feel that when immigration comes up in these debates, we very rarely get to talk about the full implications of it. But now let's talk about Russia. And here I'm entirely with Graham here, because I think one thing we refuse to acknowledge as a society, just because it's too damaging to acknowledge as a society. We've been at war with Russia since 2014 now. Since the moment they went into the Crimea, the West was at war with Russia. They've attacked us with chemical weapons. They've attacked us with information warfare. And I know we have the theory of the British stiff upper lip, but for goodness sake, when your country's coming under attack from so many areas, getting things like the Russia report and just burying it on your desk is just not acceptable as a society. So I absolutely welcome everything the Labour government does in terms of trying to look in the past. It really needs to shine a light on Russia and everything that went on, including the intervention in the Brexit debate, including the intervention in the 2019 and 2017 elections. And one of the things that makes me really sad about Brexit and what it's done to this country, I do believe that Putin was involved with interfering that, but I don't think they even cared. It was just a trial run for the Trump presidency in 2016. So we were just used as a big petri dish, a big social experiment to see, can we use these techniques to influence an election? And a couple of years ago, saying, well, Trump's gone in the US. I kind of keep my fingers crossed that that remains the case, but obviously it looks a little bit less certain now. But we have to acknowledge that we are under attack and we need to do something about it. And it kind of links back to the PR form there, because as I say, I won't go into PR too much, but I really think that only a three-chamber solution where we have technocrats, Democrats, and party Democrats is going to be able to come together to solve this problem. So sorry, I want to go back on both of those points before we moved on.
So Graham, anything on Russia from your thoughts?
I was just going, before I talk about Russia, I was going to talk about immigration. One thing that we're not talking about, again, is the people leaving. We had 600,000 people leave last year. Do you know why? Because this country's shit at the moment. It's awful. What the Tories have done to this place is absolutely disgraceful. You have an entire generation of young people who can't get a job that pays enough for them to pay the rent, never mind save up for a deposit for a £500,000 house that they will never, ever own in outright. And you've got people not having children, which also hits into the birth rate because they can't afford to have them. And if we're going to address this whole idea that, oh, we don't want people coming from other countries, I have no problem with people coming from other countries. But if that's really what you don't want, how about you make this country, right? It's already going to be more attractive than a war-torn developing nation. I'll tell you that for nothing, right? But there's other countries out there, especially around Europe and America and Australia, perhaps, that are more attractive for people to go and live in if they are at the higher end. And what Brexit has done, and the most disgusting thing in my point of view, because I'm a bit of a class warrior, is that Brexit doesn't affect the rich because they can still afford to live and work anywhere in Europe. They can afford the visas. They can have the 27 grand in the bank account that they need to show each year to say, hey, can I stay in this country? The rest of us don't. They can afford to go and stay, studying in university without Erasmus helping them. They can afford all that. And it's really interesting to me that every time you see something that actually affects the feckless rich, the loser foxes of the world, like, I don't know, lockdown, having to wear a mask, having to get vaccinated, they lose their shit. They're like, oh no, I don't have to do what the plebs have to do. I have a whole different, it's not even just like a different law onto themselves. It's a different reality, a different lived reality for these people. And they will be as blithely cruel as they like to the rest of us. And that's what gets my back up. When we were on the bollocks to Brexit bus here in Durham, where I live now, we got mobbed by a bunch of right-wing refuck, what are they called, the Brexit Party people, turning up and throwing eggs at our bus and all this. And I'm talking to them outside, and the police are saying, "Oh, don't talk to them." And I said, "Well, why are you sticking up for the likes of Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson, to neo-aristocrats who wouldn't piss on you if you're on fire? Do you think they're in your corner? They didn't even know you."
Well, Graham, that's great to hear, Graham. So I presume from that you support a wealth tax.
Oh God, yes.
Excellent. And no, Graham, I'm not luring you into a trap here, because what I think is you and the majority of Labour activists feel the same on that. You are absolutely right with how the rich have just taken such advantage of us all over the last year. And to me, I shouldn't smile at it, but it does make me smile a bit. We've had a problem of homelessness for years and years and years. Amazingly enough, during COVID, when suddenly the rich might get infected by people on the street, we solved the problem of homelessness overnight. Isn't that incredible? And then suddenly, when it's no longer a danger to us, suddenly homelessness is back. And this sort of hypocrisy and in a way, I obviously COVID was horrific, but one thing it has illustrated and did illustrate is what you can actually achieve when there is a will to achieve it. And I think Graham makes a very valid point about the three people in the world who prevent this actually happening. But let me just give a warning to the rich, even if Farageism does come into this country. Ultimately, if you are rich, you rely on a lot of people who are not rich supporting your lifestyle. You destroy the bottom of the economic pyramid, it will bring you down eventually as well. So yeah, you might be quite happy sitting in your little concrete bunker while everything goes around the world. But once you've stopped filtering your own urine, it's not going to be a very nice life for you. So I hope we're going to see a lot of wealth distribution, whatever else happens over the next government. One thing that I really did enjoy in one of the hustings I was at this week is there was apparently a reform plant there who was very, very, and he came at me with exactly the same question. And it was, I want to talk to that Rejoin guy. What's so good about rejoining the EU? But the great thing was, every other candidate had to answer it. And you could see the Lib Dem, the Green was happy to answer it, the Lib Dem less happy, the Labour candidate much less happy, but they all had to talk about how Brexit was a mistake. And actually forcing that conversation on those three parties was a good thing to see. So what I would just say to people watching this, whether you support us, whether you support Labour, when you go along to the hustings, ask a question about our EU membership, because it is something that it's the only place where candidates are forced to talk about these issues, and it's useful for our democracy to make sure they do.
Yeah, I agree.
3,400 millionaires left last year, which is quite a staggering number, on top of the 600,000 that have left. But it was interesting you said, oh, imagine if you came back 15 years. There are YouTube influencers at the moment that I've discovered that one British guy moved to Australia, somewhere else than Germany, and came back 15 years later. And he was like, what's happened? This is not the Britain I remember. There was another YouTuber who said, I think he was German, came to the UK, lived here for 10 years and said, right, I've had enough. And then said, I'm moving to Dubai because there's less crime, there's less tax, and then started extolling the virtues of Dubai. I assume he was probably sponsored by the Dubai government. Yeah. I'm like, that just, I mean, he kept extolling the virtues of one country. So, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but
an autocracy in which women and people who, you know, different places on the old sexuality scale, not treated particularly well.
No.
Oh, and also there's no bankruptcy law. So if your company goes bump, you get thrown in jail and then you still owe the money when you get out.
Wow. That's a horrible factoid.
I want to address that point you raised about people leaving the country after they become... And let's be clear, I'm not an anti-capitalist. If anything, I'd probably refer to myself as a post-capitalist rather than an anti-capitalist. I think capitalism has done terrible things to our society in terms of the divisions it's caused, but I think it's also brought immense benefits in terms of the technologies it's unlocked for us. And I'd like to see if we could bank the benefits of capitalism whilst at the same time challenging the problems of capitalism, we'd be on for a good future. And that's why I'm a supporter of the wealth tax, and I'm delighted to hear Graham is as well. But to address your point about people leaving because there's a wealth tax, if you've done well for yourself in the UK, good for you for coming up with a great idea, but it's other people in the UK that have helped you make those millions. So if you choose to leave, we're sorry to see you go, but there'll be an exit tax on you as you leave for the wealth that you've accumulated. And it'll be a lot more than the 1 to 2% annual tax if you choose to stay with us. So I'm not particularly bothered with the idea of successful entrepreneurs leaving the country, because successful entrepreneurs normally have 1 or 2 good ideas and then other people can come up to take their place. So I'm quite relaxed about that.
There's also another problem that the media focus more on a few millionaires leaving when they leave their assets behind, because you can't move property, for example.
Exactly.
But they're less concerned about, they're more concerned about that, but they're less concerned about doctors, nurses, people who are actually necessary for a functioning society. They're less concerned with them leaving.
Yeah.
So this is something that needs to, once again, with media reform, that needs.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that you got Farage saying, "Oh, we need to get net zero net migration." I'm like, well, okay, encourage more people to leave, make Britain even worse, and then we can have 1.3 people coming from other countries and 1.3 million leave because the situation's got so bad in this country.
Oh, Graham, that's not fair. Nigel Farage has done everything in his power to make this country an awful place to live. He really has given it his best.
I can't believe that anyone is still listening to him after what he did with Brexit. You know, how many times you have to be conned by someone? Fool me once.
Yeah.
Shame on you.
I've seen on the Rejoin EU channel, Twitter channel, that you've been posting all these mythical tales of the Pied Piper and Jack the Beanstalk, and why are you taking magic beans again? Which has been quite good. There was a thing that came out by Led by Donkeys yesterday. Do you know Temerko, the Russian arms dealer, former Russian arms dealer, that's now part of the Russian Conservative Party group that then got cancelled? He's been caught out, according to Led by Donkeys, to be giving money to the IA to give over to the Conservative Party. So he stopped the Russia thing, the Russia pro-conservative group, came out of that, and then found another way to pump in. And according to Led by Donkeys, I think it's 1.4 million.
Yeah. Well, this is something that needs to be addressed. So look, Russia, for one, but you just mentioned the IEA, which is based on 55 Dufton Street, along with Civitas and the LGB Alliance, which is an anti-trans group. They're all based in the same offices. A lot of them are charities, believe it or not. So they get gift aid. So they get money off you, where you're a taxpayer and someone, a Russian oligarch or something, drops a load of dirty money into their bank accounts. It could get gift aid if that Russian oligarch perhaps has a house in Belgravia, which a lot of them do. So, that needs to be addressed. We need to move away from this think tank model of deciding what the media narrative is and the political narrative in our country. And it has been absolutely dominated by the think tanks, which have these deep roots in Russian politics. So I've spoken about this on my channel before, but there was a book in 1997 by Andrew Duggan, a Russian strategist, basically called The Foundations of Geopolitics, and it laid out a way for Russia to get off its arse as this backwater basket case with no potatoes into a 21st century superpower to be reckoned with, to get it back on its feet. And a lot of the things that they've ticked off there, like Ukraine being annexed is on the list. Britain being cut off from the rest of Europe is on the list. Instability in the US and letting Nazis and lunatics rule the roost is on the list. And that needs to be taken into account when we go, what has Russia been doing to us? And Richard's right when he talks about we've been at war with Russia since 2014. I think we should have been at war with Russia since 2008 when they invaded Georgia and took South Ossetia. They took a third of another country's territory. Why? For the crime, Georgia, of wanting to be part of the EU and maybe join NATO. And Russia were like, no, not doing that. Biggest country in the world. We need to be a little bit bigger. We'll have that. And we need the fact that they aren't talking about it. I understand why they're not. But at the same time, because they've got to win the election. And this is probably, Richard, where we differ on strategy for getting them elected. Because if we talk about migration, if Angela Rayner had made the speech last week that Stephen Flynn made and said, migration's great, we should have more immigrants, they are the backbone of the country, Labour will get crucified in the tabloid press.
I mean, when we're saying that we can't stand for election on a platform because people won't vote for us, how do we become better than the people that we know actively lie to people to get votes? And I'll be honest with you, I've had a number of people from Labour backgrounds, not yourself or anyone in this room, just to be clear, who kind of said to me, look, we don't believe all this stuff in our hearts. A Labour government is going to be better. A Labour government is going to deal with these things. Yes, people have said that to me. But morally, you're asking me to vote for what I know is potentially a dishonest manifesto, admittedly through omission rather than actively lying, like the Conservative one is, in order to achieve that particular goal. And I'm sorry, for me, I can only vote for a programme that I believe is honest and open.
Well, I mean, you talk about the omissions, but don't you think it's better just not say that you're going to do those things if you don't think there's a realistic chance of being able to do it in the next 5 years in the next parliament? I'd rather they were honest and said, look, we're not even going to look at this. This is what you can expect when we get into power. And what I expect from them is to try and rectify the economy, number one, because everything that we talked about, you talk about homelessness, talk about the NHS, education, potholes in roads, all of it, the low birth rate, all of it is connected to the economy. And they need to get the economy back on track. That is their number one priority. And when I've talked to Labour MPs and said, why aren't you going on about the EU more? Why aren't you talking about PR? Why aren't you talking about this? They say to me, no one's talking about it on the doorstep. You go canvassing and you knock on someone's door and you say, what are the issues that are bothering you at the moment? Number one is the NHS for most people. The fact they can't get a dentist, the fact that they can't see their doctor for weeks, the fact that they've been in pain for 18 months, waiting for a knee replacement, like in crippling pain. They can't walk because of what this Tory government's done to the NHS. So I can understand why we get very passionate about our things. We want to rejoin the EU. We definitely want PR being brought in, both of them, press reform and proportional representation. But for a lot of people on the doorstep, the immediate thing is the economy.
You see, Graham, the reason I'm smiling is because, again, without attributing to individuals, I've been talking to credible candidates on the doorstep who are knocking. And one or two of them have said to me that they're surprised how often the EU comes up when they actually knock on people's doors. And I guess we're all going to see these anecdotally. I can't really say anything because when I knock on the door and I say I'm from the Rejoin EU party, oddly enough, I get a reaction based on Rejoin EU. But you're absolutely right. It's an election where 68 million people have 68 million different issues. Not all of them are able to vote, obviously. And I understand that if you are one of the beauty of a party like mine is we're not trying to win 50+1% of the population. We're trying to talk to what we see as the 10% of the population who can clearly see how Brexit is affecting the economy and how it can be clear, and to try to persuade 2 or 3 out of that 10% that making a stand on that basis is a useful thing to do at this particular election. But I would argue, and even if it's not popular on the doorstep, one of the key ways of fixing our economy is, of course, our relationship with Europe. And it's not that we just have to fix the economy from where it is now. It is going to get worse. The food insecurity that climate change is going to bring to us over the next 5-year period is going to exacerbate all the problems we've got. And let's just imagine it from the point of view of a small international farm in the middle of Europe producing goods and exporting them. Who are you going to give priority to? The 26 easy countries to export to, or the one difficult one that has lots of trade barriers in its way? And this is where I often criticize the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats for not being more blunt about this, but at least both of them, particularly the Green Party, are talking about the issues of the customs union and how at least addressing that issue. At the moment, I'm not hearing anything from Labour that convinces myself that they will tackle this. The idea of having a closer relationship is so nebulous. I mean, yeah, okay, give Ursula von der Leyen a hug when you see her. I'm sure that's going to be better coming from Keir Starmer than Rishi Sunak. But how exactly is that going to translate to a roadmap? Now, Graham, you said that you yourself have a comfortable roadmap that you think is going to be followed to rejoining the EU. I personally think that whatever roadmap we go down, unfortunately, we know how bad referendums are at uniting the population in anger to a certain extent. But unfortunately, I think whatever road we've got go down has to come from explicit public consent, which means, unfortunately, we are going to have a referendum for the country to point the direction. And really, that has to happen sooner than later. And I would like to see whatever incoming government we've got consulting with the people on the EU at the earliest possible opportunity. And why not you? Oh, sorry, Graham.
I feel the same way, but no, actually, when you say the earliest possible opportunity, I don't think now's the time. And I'm saying that as someone who got incredibly frustrated, you know, when we were protesting against Brexit in those days, and we were saying, let's have a march in London. And the people above us somehow, who, you know, I didn't even get to meet, were like, no, now is not the time. And I'm like, when is the time? Obviously. But what I'd say about this is that the population of the UK, I honestly believe that we need to get conservative voters. We need to get people who voted for UKIP to go, yeah, that was a mistake. Yeah, we messed up there. And for something that is so, it's an earthquake, what happened, a political earthquake, for something that changes our constitution in such a significant way, I think that it needs a supermajority. Because if it's 50-50, you are never going to end that row.
I don't disagree.
I think that we could get to that by the end of the decade. And when we talk about the path, there was one of the things, I think it was Mike Galsworthy who said this to me in January 2020. I think it was on the day that we were leaving the EU. He said, look, today is the furthest we are ever going to be away from the EU. And every step forward now is slowly going to bring us back towards the EU. And we've already seen this with Horizon. We've rejoined Horizon. Under Labour, I could see us joining Erasmus, or at least Erasmus Plus. And also the EU have put forward to Labour, hey, would you like a freedom of movement for young people scheme? Labour have said no to that before the election. And I know why they've said, well, I can guess why they've said no to it, because they'll get crucified by the Mail. And one of the things that we have to account for is that no one under the age of 50 reads a newspaper. Great. but also hardly anyone under the age of 50 bothers to vote. So when you look at like the number of people who actually go out and vote and change things, it's generally older people. And we need to acknowledge that and do what we can to make sure these papers aren't allowed to just print lies and drip feed poison into people's minds. Don't forget, in 2010, when they had the election, they asked people what the most important, like the 3 most important issues that they cared about, and it was the economy and the NHS and potholes in roads.
I just want to ask a question of Graham, and I don't mean to put you on the spot on this, but
yeah.
When Labour, so we're looking at a Labour majority more likely than not, and a Labour government. Would you welcome so when Labour are in power over the next number of years, there are going to be by-elections, there are going to be MPs who drop out or whatever, and there's going to be a challenge. Would you, if you don't see the Labour Party or the Labour government going in the direction of a better relationship with the European Union or starting the wheels of motion to rejoin the European Union, would you support challenges to the Labour Party or a Labour government in the future? So we're talking about after the general election, so maybe in 2027, 2028. Would you support a challenge to the Labour Party if you don't see them going fast enough?
I guess so. I mean, I stood against Labour in 2017 as an independent pro-EU candidate. But I mean, I can't see the previous leader of Labour was very anti-EU, and people argue about this, and I can show them as much video footage as they like, and they go, no, he didn't really mean that. He didn't. This is the guy who, the day after the referendum, said that we should activate Article 50. This is the guy who whipped his MPs a 3-line whip to vote with the Tories to activate Article 50 without any amendments, any provisos for the right to British citizens living in the EU or EU citizens living in the UK. No, not a thought. Just gave the Tories the biggest blank check in history, a £1 trillion blank check that he didn't even need to vote for. And he said, yeah, 3-line whip for the Tory mainstream policy. Starmer hasn't done that. Starmer has supported certain things that the Tories have done, especially in international matters like the support for Ukraine, which I agree with as well, where it's been sensible to support the Tories. But in power, unless they absolutely break my heart and do absolutely everything wrong and go for, I don't know, Brexit plus and say, right, that's it. We're leaving the European Court of Human Rights and we're leaving NATO and we're leaving the world. Goodbye, Earth. Unless they do that, I'm not going to be. I don't think I'm going to be too. I'm going to be criticizing Labour if they do something that I don't agree with, and I always will do that. I'm not that much of a party faithful. Like I say, I stood against them once. But I think that the next 5 years, I think we're just going to have to be patient. I think this is where Richard and I sort of differ, because Richard's like, no, let's do the show. Let's do the show right here.
I kind of disagree. I think one of the, and I'm interested by that point you say about we're the furthest away we've ever been from Europe. I would like to believe that, but I critically believe it actually doesn't matter how big Starmer's majority is at this election. Whether it's 50 or 150, it's pretty much going to be the same. What matters is what is the voice of opposition and where it's coming from. If it turns out to be a Tory party that then is taken over by wets and moderates, maybe we'll get something sensible. If it's a Tory party taken over by the Braverman wing, then it probably isn't going to be very useful, and we're going to get dragged further away. If it's the Liberal Democrats, then I think you're right. And the opposition will naturally gravitate the government towards it. If it's Farage, then I think it's a nightmare. And I think if Farage is anywhere close to leading the opposition, we are in the same situation that France has been in recently with Le Pen and the forces that we've got there. And I think, unfortunately, that does drag us to a very, very dangerous future. But let me be very clear. I believe Keir Starmer. And when I say I believe Keir Starmer, I mean I believe he will do in this election what he says he's going to do in the election. So like you, I'd like to see the detail of the manifesto. I don't think there's a chance in hell he'll try and get us out of the ECHR. And I certainly excuse me, don't think there's a chance in hell he'll get us out of NATO. But unfortunately, I think the manifesto he's proposing leaves him, or talking about proposing, leaves him with very little wriggle room to actually deal with the issues that we need to really boost the economy. And that's why I fear that there could be a very, very dark future unless there is a decent opposition to him.
I want the Tories destroyed. I don't want them to be a party anymore. They don't deserve to be a party. The criminality, the sleaze, the fraud, the job they have done on the British economy. Don't forget, it's not just like our everyday shopping bills have gone up. They have looted trillions of pounds from this country that have been moved out of this country, assets that have been moved out of the City of London because of their actions. That what they've done is disgraceful. I think they should all be in jail, but I don't think it's going to happen because they're rich and rich people don't go to jail. Look at Donald Trump. So yeah, destroying the party, good. And then hopefully, because at the moment we talk about the extremists, they've been the extremists since 2019. They got rid of all the moderates. Yeah. It's only the wing nuts left, like Nadine Dorries and people like that. I mean, and Cruella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch. They're already UKIP. You know, they're blue kip. So yeah, destroy them and have the Lib Dems be the opposition, and then move towards PR. I would like to see in this next election, 2029 election, pushing towards PR more than pushing back towards the EU, because I think it's a stepping stone on the way back to the EU, and I don't think it's going to happen unless we get PR.
We then asked each panelist one curveball question.
Richard, first past the post is a system, and isn't your party just taking away votes and encouraging more of a chance for reform and the Conservatives to be able to get back in?
Well, first of all, we're only standing in 26 constituencies. This is consistent with our view of being a pluralist party. We believe in working with other parties rather than, and obviously with the first past the post, it is always adversarial, but we believe in working with other parties. And quite frankly, between you and me, I don't think it's going to happen. But if we were to get 26 MPs in Parliament, then I think that would be the appropriate balance for the weight our views would have. Secondly, the constituencies we're standing in, not one single constituency we're standing in is projected to be within a 5% margin of victory. And I think only 3 are projected to be within the 8 to 10% margins of victory. So I don't think it can be said that we're splitting the vote. And indeed, the only way you could accuse us of splitting the vote is if you were to say, well, as the Labour Party, we might be so terrible in the last few weeks that we'll lose 8% of the vote. Now, I'm afraid if the strongest argument about us not standing is that you as another party are too awful to be able to campaign competently over the last 3 weeks, I don't think that's a very strong argument. In fairness, I just want to say I'm not putting those words in Graham's mouth, because Graham has certainly not said those things, but that's the only credible argument I could see against arguing about where we're standing, dividing the vote.
I have a different question for Graham. So Graham, and this is more sort of for our left-wing viewers, I'd say, obviously we haven't seen the manifesto, but we have heard a lot of the talk from Keir Starmer about how he's intended to fix the economy. Everything he's doing is sort of steadying the ship. It's not fixing the problem.
Yeah, but the ship needs to be steadied. And what I would accuse you doing here of, Alex, is that you're sort of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I can understand why he's doing the things he's doing to get elected. And as someone who organised marches and rallies against Brexit, someone who gave up years of my life fighting this thing, I would do exactly what Starmer's doing to get into power, because we can be as right on and correct, politically correct as we like, as woke as we like in opposition. It makes no difference whatsoever. The only way we can actually change things for the better for millions of people in this country. Don't forget, 1 in 4 children in this country are living in poverty. And the only way we can change that is by being the people in power instead of the people sniping from the sidelines. And I welcome that. I welcome the fact that, you know, in 2019, I thought that's it. I thought the Tories were going to be in for 10 years. I couldn't see them messing up this badly. But both Brexit and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Sunak have just destroyed their own party. And all Starmer really needs to do is just make sure that he doesn't scare those. I'm trying not to be ageist here, but, you know, older Tory voters, not to scare them into voting for the Conservatives. In fact, just you know, make it so like people go, oh, well, I'm not too bothered about a Labour government coming in, because they're not going to flood the country with immigrants. They're not going to take us back into the EU on day one. And I can because a lot of the vote against Labour in the last election was a negative vote. It was people voting Conservatives because they were terrified of the idea of the previous leader being Prime Minister.
Just wanted to add a comment to what Graham said about how important what he said there about the 2019 election was. The Tories felt that they were going to be in forever, and we all did because of that majority. Now, I sincerely wish the Labour Party well when they take power on July the 4th, Graham, and I sincerely wish your government well in terms of what they do. I hope they will look at that and learn what he did wrong over the last 5 years. That's all I wanted to add to that, because I thought it was a very important point.
And Graham, a final thought?
Yeah, one of the reasons why I changed the name of the Labour Social channel last week to Politics Social is I'm supporting StopTheTories.vote, which is a tactical voting website that's set up by my friend Josh Russell and other friends. And basically you type in your postcode and it'll tell you who the tactical vote is in that constituency. Now, there are many constituencies, and Richard, your candidates are probably standing in some of these, where it says, Labour are going to win this, vote with your heart. So you can vote for the Greens, you can vote for the SNP, you can vote for Richard's party, you can vote for the Rejoin UK. Rejoin UK? Rejoin EU, if you like. So yeah, I mean, there's a plurality here at this election that's available to people that hasn't been available for a long time because of the landslide that Labour look like they're going to get. But I'll state again that I think that having all these parties on the left and the right have never been divided until now. Have some taste of your own medicine. I don't think under a first past the post system, I don't think it's the way that we affect change. I think we have to push Labour now like crazy in the next Parliament to bring in proportional representation. And then we can go
that I will certainly help you with, Graham, with anything I can do.
I agree 100%. This idea of getting rid of the Tories, they need to be decimated. They don't deserve to be in power. And as Graham said, a lot of them deserve to be in prison. I think going forward, what I hope to see is people like Graham within the Labour Party pushing it in the right direction within, and then people like Richard on the outside pushing it in the right direction from the outside. And of course, commentators like ourselves trying to have some sort of influence as well. Alex, do you want to add anything before we go?
Thank you very much. That's been awesome. That was a great show and really easy for Max and me. We didn't have to say anything. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Tune in next week for another exciting story from the files of Police Squad.